yeah, like just with what's happening in Ukraine now, do you think that kind of level of riots and revolution can cross the shores to England and London?
I think to a large degree that was what was happening in 2011. You know what I mean? And not just in 2011. You know what I mean? From earlier in the decade, from maybe like 2009, there was a lot of unrest starting, like the anti-Israel protests, the anti-BNP and EDL protests that were happening. It grew, you know, and to the student protests, the student riots, if you want to call it that. All of those things were like a chain of discontent. It was linked into all the things that were happening all over the world, in Egypt and in the Caribbean and all over the world. There's been this sort of level of uprising and discontent with the way that the world is at the moment and the way that the structure of the world is. And when Mark Duggan was murdered by the police, assassinated by the police, and we rose up on the streets all over the country for those few days, that was escalation of all those things that had happened, and the media tried its best to separate the student protests and all those other protests from the uprisings, as I call them, the riots that a lot of people call them, and go on like they were two completely separate things. You know what I mean? And this is our students just wanting to have lower tuition fees, and this is just you know what I mean, yobs from the States nicking stuff from shops. Do you know what I mean? But they're all part of the same thing. People involved in one were involved in the other because it was this anger towards the state, and not just towards the state and, you know what I mean, we haven't got enough money, but nah, people genuinely understand that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And the way that they clamp down on it, you know what I mean, giving man 4-year sentences for nicking chewing gum, and giving man 4-year sentences for being on Facebook talking about something. I see all kinds of people talking about, you know what I mean, racist comments, all these different classist comments, you know what I mean, on national media, you know what I mean, being allowed to say it because of freedom of speech. But if someone says something that goes against the agenda, prison sentence, you know what I mean. And that's the kind of things that in Ukraine, where the level of life, you know what I mean, the level of discomfort is so much more obvious than it is in the UK. People are willing to take those things. They're willing to give their life. They lose their life, and more so in places like Egypt. You know what I mean? People, and Syria even. I see people on the street talking about, I'm just happy that we had this one moment of freedom and I can die a happy woman. I saw a woman say that in Egypt when they overthrow their government. It's the same thing in Ukraine. It means more to people in Ukraine, but I'm not in a position enough to judge what's happening in the Ukraine because I haven't researched enough. I'm not there on the ground. I don't know the politics. I've heard a lot of problems about the politics. Is that there's a lot of extremely right-wing people in there involved, but you can't fault the tactics. They've taken control of something. They've taken control of they've pushed forward their demands, and I can see that happening in England or the UK, whatever you want to call it. But we're not at the level of desperation that those people are, and also I think people are a lot more wary of the repercussions here. You know what I mean? People aren't willing to lose their life. They're not willing to go to prison. They're not willing to, well, some are, and there's people like the brothers who were licking shots at helicopters in Birmingham who no one seems to want to talk about. You know what I mean? They're just been sort of swept under the rug. But that's a revolutionary act, shooting at a police helicopter. People were talking about how that wasn't the revolution, and it wasn't the revolution as such, but there's not going to be this romanticized, idealized revolution that people want to see. Revolution is ugly and gritty and people die. You know what I mean? If it's, well, you know what I mean, if your oppressor doesn't respond the way you want it to respond. And yeah, but when things like that happen, people don't want to get involved and people want to criticize it. Even people who are sort of call themselves activists or call themselves socialists or anarchists, they criticize people for doing things that are taking it to another level. Whereas in the Ukraine, people take it to another level when they're all in it together. I mean, obviously there's some people who criticize, and that's what I say, I'm not in the best position to judge. But it could happen here, but Britain will clamp down. We saw water cannons, we saw rubber bullets being talked about. It's a tactic. You know what I mean? The day that police shoot a man down in the middle of a protest or a riot in the UK, we'll see where people are willing to take it to. You know what I mean? And they're very strategic about not letting that happen, because if it's seen that people are uprising and you don't respond with violence, it makes it look like you're some kind of peaceful government who doesn't want to attack its own people. If you do it with water cannons, it just shows your authority, but not in a way that's lethal, obviously lethal. The day that it gets to another level, then we'll have to see what's happening with that. But again, that's another thing about the consequences. What's happening now with Russia in Crimea as a result of what's happened in the Ukraine. I think people are very wary about it in the UK. If we were to sort of, rise up and overthrow, how would that damage the country? How would that, you wouldn't be able to get your internet no more. You wouldn't be able to get your McDonald's no more. And people are scared of things like this, I think, over here. Which then sort of damages the chances of there being any sort of real social revolutionary change. And maybe, maybe that's, maybe with what everything's happening in Russia and the tensions that happen between the Russia, Crimea, Ukraine and the West now, that can escalate into a bigger state of war, which, I don't think a lot of people want and might not be productive for mankind, and it's humankind, and it's I think that's something people are wary about here, and I'll just end on the fact that, only when you're pushed to the edge of desperation are people really willing to risk life and freedom for their ideals, and I don't think we're really at that stage here in the UK. Yeah.